So this hedonistic calculus, it's not necessarily selfish, right? It's not just the greatest good for me that I'm calculating, but the greatest good for everyone concerned, right? Even still, Mill was a little bit worried about how this hedonistic calculus would play itself out in terms of actual actions, right? Now, if we compare a couple, just using Bentham's chart, if we compare, say, finding a cure for cancer and eating cake, right? In terms of a number of the categories, right? How sure am I that pleasure will occur? How soon will I get to experience the pleasure, etc., etc., etc. Mill thought there was a problem with Bentham's calculus, and we can just kind of intuitively see that this calculus may rate the more complicated, uncertain kind of cultural elements, these which Mill calls kind of higher elements of culture, rather low, whereas immediate pleasure, since we're more certain it's going to occur, since it's going to be more free from pain, since we get to experience it sooner, etc. That's 3 of the 7 categories right there. These immediate, or what Mill called lower order pleasures, may rate higher by Bentham's system. So what Mill has to do is adapt this hedonistic calculus so that perhaps these, what he called higher elements of culture, will not be just stripped from our culture if we all become utilitarians. So Mill was worried about these kinds of calculations that were likely to arise. So for the average person, a complex mathematical problem is going to rate rather low on Bentham's calculus, whereas a sporting event would rate quite high, right? So should we abolish math and all support sports instead? Maybe not, right? That might be problematic. Should we abolish complicated medical procedures in favor of cake eating? Maybe that might be kind of problematic, right? So Mill wants to claim that some kinds of pleasure are more desirable and more valuable than others. Now, by making this claim, Mill has abandoned this calculus of felicity that I just introduced, right? It was just sort of a benchmark to get you thinking like a utilitarian. In so doing, Mill argues that the pleasures should be estimated not only quantitatively, because Bentham only measured the quantity of the pleasures, but Mill wants to add a qualitative distinction as well. Some pleasures are better than other pleasures just as a pleasure. Now, on your page 8 to 9 in Utilitarianism, Mill claims, if I'm asked what I mean by difference in quality in pleasures, or what makes one pleasure more valuable than another merely as a pleasure, except in its being greater in amount, there is but one possible answer. Of 2 pleasures, if there be one to which all or almost all who have experienced both, right, give a decided preference, irrespective of any feeling of moral obligation to prefer it, by those who are completely acquainted with both, placed so far above the other that they preferred, even knowing it to be attended with a greater amount of discontent, would not resign it for any quantity of the other pleasure which their nature is capable of, we are justified in ascribing to it the preferred enjoyment to superiority in quality, so far outweighing quantity as to render it in comparison of small account. Right? So, Mill does 2 things in this passage, right, that both adapt Bentham's position slightly. Right? In very general terms, what Mill wants to argue here is that, well, these lower order pleasures, like eating cake, having sex, sitting in a hot tub, what have you, these immediate sorts of pleasures, right? Well, they're easier to get, right? But they fulfill us less, right? What Mill wants to claim is that human beings were in rather a precarious position, right? On the one hand, we have a greater sensitivity to pain, but what this greater sensitivity to pain allows us is the consciousness and sensitivity to a qualitative qualitatively better sort of pleasure as well. Right? And when somebody has experienced this qualitatively better sort of pleasure, right, it would be hard to get them to give that up, right, for these lower order pleasures. Right? So, right, Mill famously claims it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Right? So by hedonistic calculus, wallowing in mud, mud bath, it's kind of nice, right, might rate higher than the kind of complicated moral reasoning that Socrates was talking about. But Mill wants to agree with Socrates and claim that the unexamined life is not worth living for humans. Right? So, he adapts this pleasure principle in two ways. First, we have to have experience of both pleasures, right, in order to adequately be in a position to judge. Right? Now, let's say somebody is comparing Coke to Pepsi. I've tried Coke, but I haven't tried Pepsi, and I want to say that Pepsi is better than Coke. I'm not an adequate judge. Right? Likewise, with any two pleasures, we would not be able to rate these pleasures unless we have compared, right, and have experience of both sorts of pleasure. Right? So commonsensical, makes good sense. The second alteration to Bentham's initial calculus here is this distinction between quality and quantity. Quality outweighs quantity, and if we think of a couple of quick examples here, eating potato chips versus helping my neighbor. Right? Potato chips, neighbor. It seems that helping our neighbor is going to be qualitatively better than eating potato chips, depending on our neighbor. Right? Having a meaningful, long-term, committed relationship versus sleeping with a prostitute. Seems that the relationship's better. So on and so forth. Right? So, Mill wants to point out to us that this judgment between quantity and quality, it rests on the individual. Right? We're qualitative, the best qualitative judges. He claims on page 10, that is, the dignity of humanity is such that it admits of a greater appreciation of the qualitative elements of pleasure over these quantitative elements. While a beast simply wants what it wants, humans distinguish qualitatively between various pleasures and thus have a greater ability to experience both pleasure and suffering. So we've got two types of pleasure, higher order or noble, and lower order or immediate. Right? Regardless of whether noble pleasures actually make the individual happier in their day-to-day lives, it seems that, well, since we're calculating the greatest good for the greatest number, higher order or noble pleasures make all of us happy. Even if I don't enjoy doing complicated mathematics, I'm happy that somebody's out there doing it, so that the engineering principles that the bridges that I drive, that make the bridges that I drive over, are sound, right? Even though I might not enjoy searching for treatments for leukemia, if I've got leukemia, and everybody who's got leukemia is glad that people are doing this. So it's the greatest good for the greatest number, and this allows us a door open to a method of evaluating and weighting qualitative pleasures. So that's the distinction.